slides and PDFs.
Welcome. We are live. Apologies about the delay. We're just having a few technical challenges. We are here today with Jackie Edry. Hope I said your name right, Jackie. And this is a session all about embracing acquired neurodivergence, a journey through healing and advocacy. And Jackie's got some really great insights to share around their journey. And so, Jackie, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Have a second. I have a technical problem. 1 second. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So, hello. Hi.
Yep.
My name is Jackie Edry. Nice to meet you all. I'm excited to be here. I'm an author and neurodiversity advocate, and my specialty is sensory processing. And all things neurodivergent, autism, dyslexia, ADHD. I'm a parent, caretaker. I have neurodivergent children, and my oldest son is autistic. And I also had myself, I'm neurodistinct, as I had brain surgery 12 years ago. And that when I woke up, all of my senses were scrambled. So it was a very long recovery, and it gave me a lot of insights about the things I've been seeing for the many, many years that I've worked as an educator and a parent caretaker. And I decided that would help others if I share those insights. So I wrote a book called Moving Forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith, and started a blog in 2021. And since then, I've been linking up with people from around the world and teaching about the things I know and insights. And that's in short what I do. And I'm always happy to present and link up with people and help and answer questions wherever people might need, whatever people might need.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for introducing yourself. Okay, so for those of you who are new to the term in acquired neurodivergence, Jackie, would you like to kind of explain what that means for you, so that we're all on the same page?
Sure. Well, basically, there's a term, you know what? I'd actually like to do it as part of the presentation because I talk about what neurodiversity is as a general rule. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to move into that. Feel free to stop, answer questions. I do apologize because the slides are a little bit crowded. We had some technical issues which didn't allow me to have the things slide in one thing at a time, or the dyslexic font, which I used to make it easier for people to read. So please excuse that. My neurodivergence, or neurodistinctness as I prefer, I use the term neurodivergence only because it's a term that is widely recognized and accepted, but I prefer neurodistinct. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I was always a different thinker, but I was not considered particularly, I wasn't diagnosed with anything. Also, it was years back, they weren't diagnosing people with different minds that much. But after my brain surgery, because I woke up with scrambled senses and different kinds of sensory processing and different kinds of ways of experiencing reality, that is what acquired neurodivergence is. So basically, I'd like to introduce you to neurodiversity as a term. Basically, we're all neurodiverse. Everybody has different brains and different minds. So it just means that neuro is to do with neurology and diversity. Everyone is different. Neurodivergent or neurodistinct is a neurotype that is different from what's accepted for the typical neurotypical terms. Now, I don't know what neurotypical really means, but because we all are different, but there is some sort of standard scale that is accepted that people consider to be in the neurotypical range. And neurodivergent is something that diverges from that particular what is considered the norm. And these sort of differing neurotypes include ADHD, autism, sensory or auditory processing disorder, dyslexia, Ehrlich syndrome, and more. And oftentimes people with different neurotypes also have different types of thinking. So like the standard person will have a logical thinking. Like in schools, they say, well, they teach you one thing and that means another thing. This leads to this, leads to this in sort of streamlined fashion. But many people who have neurodistinct minds tend to think in different types of ways. They can think associatively. I think logically and associatively. So one thing will remind me of something else and then something else. So very quickly we can be on one subject and it can wind up on another subject because it reminded me of something. And you'll see this a lot of times in schools or in workplaces where you think they're on a subject and then somebody says something that seems totally irrelevant. But for them, it's connected. So that's associated thinking. And I have both, so I can sort of use my logic to help me with my associated thinking so that I don't trail off too far. But it's a common thing, especially with people with attention issues. Or some people think in pictures. My son thinks in pictures. So his first language is pictures. When he wants to learn something new, he'll go into Google Pictures to learn about it, rather than thinking as whatever your native spoken language is. So there's all different kinds of minds and all different kinds of diversity and all different kinds of thinking. And neurodiversity there's also a neurodiversity movement, which has a symbol, which you can see, because people are trying to raise awareness about how people experience the word differently and not see it as something negative necessarily, rather different. So what's my connection to all of this? When I was in high school, I volunteered with an autistic child. And then I went to college and I started working at summer camps with autistic kids. And then I wrote a thesis on educating autistic children. That was many, many years ago in the 80s. And then my son was born and he was diagnosed autistic, and my other kids are neurodistinct in various diagnoses. I started running parent advocacy and support groups. And then, like I said, 12 years ago, I had brain surgery to remove a tumor on my brainstem. By the way, if there's anything that's unclear, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. And we'll have the discussion and questions at the end as well. So my family, we're all neurodistinct. Some of my kids were diagnosed. My other son is autistic, as I said. 2 of my children were mistakenly diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. And their actual diagnoses are Ehrlich syndrome, which I'll explain in a little while, auditory processing disorder, and sensory processing disorder. And what I can say about it is it's fascinating, it's colorful, it's creative. There are changes, learning how to, we need to make and adjustments we need to make to live with different brains. But if you learn how to use it properly, it's a tremendous gift. Is everything clear today? I'm not seeing anybody. I just see my presentation, so I can't see the audience and I can't see what's going on. So if there are any problems or any questions, please ask. So what happened for me was life change in 2013. I started to feel weak, as if I was running out of gas. Couldn't understand what people saying in my left ear. I could hear, it was testing in normal range, but my brain wasn't processing sound. That's a very important thing to understand, because people are often misdiagnosed. They know there's something wrong with their hearing, but it comes out normal on hearing tests because you can hear beeps, so you can hear singular words, but that doesn't have to do with functional processing. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a little while. And eventually, I was diagnosed with a tumor on my brainstem, and I was told that I needed immediate surgery, and it wasn't clear if I was going to survive or not. Very much not clear. I had to get used to that reality. I had to say goodbye to everybody I loved just in case I didn't wake up, and it was a very, very, very harrowing experience. But thank God, I woke up. And when I woke up, all my sensory perception became scrambled and distorted. I couldn't get my body to do what I wanted it to do. I couldn't connect my brain and my speech, my mouth. I would think things and want to say them, and I couldn't get the words out. I still stutter at this point. You'll probably see it at some point. I'm also bilingual, so sometimes my languages collide in my brain, and that also slows me up a little bit. I couldn't organize my body to do simple tasks, and I've become very, very, very neurodistinct. The way I see, the way I hear, the way I experience the world is definitely not what it was before. But it's interesting. And the biggest thing I think that I learned from all of this was that you can't reason or argue with the senses. You just can't. So if you are in a sensory unfriendly environment, you can't say to your brain, okay, well, the music's going to stop in a few minutes, so I'm just going to ignore it, even if it's loud and it's bothering me. Because what happens, you just get more and more overwhelmed, and then your body can shut down, melt down, all different kinds of reactions. The cognition does not overrule sensory processing or the physiological reaction to a sensory overwhelming situation. And that's really, really important. And so a little bit about sensory processing. We rely on our senses to process information from the environment. Neurotypical people have automatic filters that prevent sensory overload. So pretty much we see what we think we're going to see and feel what we think we're going to feel. And we hear what we expect. So let's say if we were living on a very noisy street, okay? If your mind deems it's irrelevant to hear the noise from the street, after a little while, you won't pay any attention to the traffic going on. It just becomes sort of background noise. You're not even aware of it. But then if an ambulance goes by, you're going to pay attention. So that's the kind of automatic filtering that we do in all of our senses. But if those filters aren't working properly, then the person can receive too much information from the environment. You can be hypersensitive. You can be hyposensitive, where you're not getting enough, and therefore you're seeking sensory input. A lot of times you'll see it with a child, say that they're looking for deep pressure because they're not getting enough pressure. So they're in people's face, they're getting hugged, they're too physical. That somebody has dysregulated in their sensory seeking. Or you can have a combination of both. You can have them at any of the senses, and that changes throughout the day, so that you might be regulated in 1 minute, and the minute next you won't. And sensory processing issues are prevalent with autistic individuals and people diagnosed with Ehrlich syndrome, dyslexia, ADHD, auditory APD, sensory processing disorder. And a dysregulated system makes it difficult to understand and interpret the world, and it can be very challenging at times. People with sensory issues have to work much harder than the regular people to work to get through the day, because it also takes up cognition, and it also takes up emotions, because you're on many times you can feel like you have to be on guard because things are dysregulated, or you're not sure what's going on. Like I said, logic doesn't overrule it. Can trigger a fight, flight, freeze response if there's a strong sensory stimuli that you find disturbing. This can lead to a meltdown. So it's best to learn, if you're dealing with a neurodivergent individual, what their triggers are and try and avoid them if possible. Another thing that's very important is a meltdown is not the same as misbehaving. If a person refuses to go into a mall, or if a child has a tantrum because they don't want to go in, it's not because they're being naughty, it's because their body's going on to defense. Our most dominant sense is the visual sense. It's about 70% of our sensory input is visual. And visual perception and processing is neurological. That's what the brain does with the information picked up by the eye. So if you say it's irregular visual processing, if you have Ehrlich syndrome or dyslexia or ADHD or any kind of neurological difference. And you don't think you're seeing things properly, or you might not even know that actually you're not seeing things properly. You might think everybody sees things that way because people don't ask if you see uh, uh, bolts of light coming out of a light post at night, or a person's face melts, or the letters are moving around the page, or anything like that. But if you see things in those ways, which are different, they won't be picked up on a regular eye test because that only measures hardware, not software. Auditory and visual processing are actually software. It's like what the brain does with the information that comes in. Even if the information comes in and the mechanics are working properly, the brain might be doing something different. Vestibular stimulation. I'm sorry, that something popped up with a question, and I think, how might the experience different from growing up neurodivergent? I'm sorry, is that for me or no? It's from somebody else. Okay. After that, we'll address the questions. Ruth, I'm gonna, unless you pop on and tell me something, I'll try and disregard comments that pop on my screen and answer them after. And vestibular stability is also affected by visual processing. If you want to be on the screen with that, that will be fine. Then I can see you and you can signal me. It's also affected by visual processing. It has to do with the conversation between your ears and your vestibular nerves and your eyes and eye movements. So one of the things I mentioned a few times, and you might notice that I am wearing dark glasses. This is my particular color. These are Irlen spectral fictors. Irlen syndrome, sometimes coined as visual stress, has to do with irregular processing of white light. And what happens is some of the colors in the spectrum are not processed by our brains in a regular fashion, and that can cause visual disturbances or visual stress, which means that the way you perceive and process information is different. It can cause light sensitivity. It can cause problems reading. It can cause things. For me, I had very severe visual disturbances. That means that I would look at somebody and their face would melt or split. Streets would go up when I was walking down them. Lights would dance across the ceiling, and I would have a vertigo looking at stairs or riding in a car. But some people just have some attention or reading issues, or migraines. It really depends on the individual. It can be genetic. 4 of my kids have Irlen lenses. It is not identified by an ophthalmologist or in a didactic assessment. They will detect there's reading issues per se, but they won't know why. And it can affect up to about 15% of the general population and 50% of individuals with any kind of neurodistinctness, especially people with brain injury or chronic headache and migraines. So if you are experiencing any of those things, you can go onto the Irlen.com website, and you can do a questionnaire and help you detect whether or not it's worth for you to go to get an assessment, which is a 2-part simple assessment. Initially with colored overlays to see if you have Irlen, and then if it seems that you do have that, then you get fitted for spectral filters. Mine are a combination of 3 different colors, but some people have different colors and different number of colors. I have one child with yellow, one child with purple, and one child with gray. So it really depends on the kind of what's going on in your neurology, which can also change throughout the years. Hormones tend to affect it as well. So there are a lot of different factors as our neurology changes. The color of our lenses sometimes changes. And I don't know what's going on in other countries. I think in the UK, there is some recognition of Irlen syndrome and some testing in the educational systems. Well, there used to be. In Israel, it's not recognized, unfortunately, because the minute a child has some reading, slow delays in reading, it's helpful to get an assessment. My youngest child was assessed in 2nd grade and did not develop the kind of gaps in learning and or social difficulties that my other kids experienced who were diagnosed late. It also can help you with general feeling of well-being. And many things are affected by it. Your depth perception, as I said, ability to read in many cases, how close to stand to people, night vision. There's so many things that are affected. Ability to track a ball. So if you have a child, they could be very good at sports, but at the same time, when they want to play soccer or football, they're terrible because they don't know how to track the ball. It gets lost. So these sort of things are affected. It's not only affecting reading. Similar things go on in the auditory sense. Auditory processing is neurological. So again, like I said about a hearing test, your brain can, a hearing test can come out normal, but you could have auditory processing disorder, even very severe auditory processing disorder, which will not be picked up on a regular hearing test, only one that tests for auditory processing disorder. That's functional auditory processing. So if in a loud room, let's say, or an open workspace, in a classroom, have a difficult time keeping track of what's being said or sounds disturb you, that has to do with auditory processing and not with your ability to hear. It's your neurology. And sometimes it exists on its own, and sometimes it coexists with ADHD, autism, and other neurological differences. It can be misdiagnosed as ADHD, which has happened in the instance of my child also had earline and auditory processing issues, and many times they go together, I found. And what happens, let's say, in a classroom situation is, let's say the person is cognitive facilities are intact or even high. They can have follow things very well. So what happens is sit in a class and there's noise, and suddenly they miss a word that the teacher says. And after that, they zone out for a second to think about what the teacher said so they stay on track. And they zone back in, but the teacher's already said another 4 or 5 lines, and then they get completely lost. Within 10 minutes, they have no idea what's going on in the class. So this is how a person, then they start to fidget, and they move around because they get lost. And then the teacher says, oh, well, the parents, well, they can't pay attention, which is true. They can't pay attention. But the reason they can't pay attention is because of an auditory processing issue, and not because they have something that will change. Ritalin or something like that will eliminate the problem. It might eliminate some of the symptoms, but it doesn't treat the actual problem. So that's how auditory processing can affect learning and can be misdiagnosed. It's very exhausting and trying to understand speech with an APD. And as time goes on throughout the day, the more tired you are, the more difficult it is to gather the cognitive resources and emotional resources to focus. So that also affects things. Reading can help to clarify pronunciation. Reading also helps understanding. I read lips, which helps me. And assistive technology can be very useful in these situations. In school, you can ask for an acoustic classroom. Cell phones have features. iPhone has Live Listen, where you can put the cell phone, turn on the feature, and you put the cell phone next to somebody, or let's say the teacher, or in a boardroom, or wherever you might be. And then you put on AirPods, and you can, the thing that's being said will be directed directly into your ears, and it'll pick up just the conversation, and then you won't hear the background noise. Another thing that's very, very useful, we found for my autistic son, who has very severe auditory processing problems, is low gain hearing aids. Not everyone knows about them or how to program them. But if you can find a provider that can do that, it's a regular high grade filter hearing aid, but filters are very good. So if the brain is not filtering sound, background noise, the hearing aid does it. So it doesn't really increase volume, it just filters. And some of our additional senses are tactile, gustatory, olfactory. Tactile can be you don't like being touched, or itchy tags, or uncomfortable clothes, and pain from touch. I have a suggestion that if a person feels uncomfortable in their clothes, don't fight with them about it. Let them wear that, old cotton, whatever it may be, that's been washed 500 times, because if they're uncomfortable in their clothes, they're not going to be able to concentrate, and they're not going to feel comfortable, and they're not going to be able to learn. And I actually think that the person who put itchy tags in clothes is actually, I don't know, someone sent to torture people. I can't have an itchy tag in the clothes. That'll ruin my day. And there are actually clothing that is available on the market that is sensory friendly if you need to look for it. Sometimes pain and touch will cause problems in school. Let's say if a child's sitting and there's a crowded classroom and a kid walks by and brushes against them with their bag or whatever, and that kid could feel like it hurt them, and then they can get up and start a fight because they think they've been hurt, even though the average person, the average child, wouldn't react to it at all. Gustatory senses have to do with eating, picky eating, aversion to textures, mixing foods. Again, you can't fight with that. And actually, if you try and fight with someone about feeding, what happens is many times people get eating disorders. The way we dealt with it was we had, I used to put a lot of different types of food just hanging around when my child would play. And sometimes, eventually they would touch it or look at it or smell it or put it in their mouth, and then realize that it was okay. So my child, when he was young, I got 5 things for many, many years, and then now he eats everything. He's a young adult. But it took time, but you really can't argue about it. If you look at something and it makes you nauseous and people force it in your mouth, it's gonna just make the person sick, make the person frustrated, or cause trauma. Same thing can happen from the olfactory sense, all kinds of perfumes, even cleaning supplies. I can vouch for that. Or somebody's, sitting in a workplace and next to the kitchen, and there's the kitchen smells, and there's like I said, perfume and all the kind of stuff. It can ruin person's concentration. So when you're in a work environment, you might want to, as an employer, to think about asking the employees where it's most comfortable for them to sit, to take into account that sort of thing. The same thing can happen in a classroom, How sensory overload feels. Like I said, you can't overrule it. You can understand what's going on, right? Logically, but you can't prevent your body from freaking out, as I would say. You can't prevent your body from releasing all the chemicals that go in fight, flight, freeze mode. You can start shaking. You can shut down. I've had parts of my body actually shut down so that I can't walk. My leg refuses to move. I've had shakes. I've had all different kinds of crazy things, just from noise or lights, which sounds ridiculous. My cognition tells me it's ridiculous. My body doesn't care. If you shout at a person with a sensory overload, or punish for it, it makes it worse. And forcing a person to remain in an overloading situation can cause trauma and PTSD and emotional damage. I know many people who have been forced, particularly in ABA type settings, to force them to sit in these environments, to desensitize them, and the only thing it does is cause PTSD. So that's food for thought. A meltdown is when the nervous system completely overloads, and then there's always a reason. That one thing that's people who don't have these issues to understand, hard to understand, is it looks like nothing happened. It's just a noise, it's just a perfume, or it's just a who knows what. And so the average person won't even understand what's going on or why it's going on, but there's always a reason for it. So you need to ask the person what the trigger is. And if you have a child that's nonverbal or something, you need to try and figure out what the trigger is. But it's not being spoiled and it's not acting out. It's kind of like when there's a power surge and the circuit breaker trips. That's what a nervous system overload or meltdown could be. Your circuit breaker in your brain trips, and that's it. And the best way to deal with that is to take a person to a quiet space, a sensory friendly space, maybe even a dark room or wherever they feel most comfortable, and wait till probably 20 minutes or so until the body starts to calm down, and then maybe discuss what they feel or need. But during the time the body is in complete overload and the brain is in complete overload, you cannot calm it down or reason with it. You just need to wait it out, and certainly not push for it. Speech and communication, I don't know if time-wise, where are we? We don't have that much time, so I'm going to do this quickly. Formulating speech is probably one of the most complex things, and involves motor and thought. So let's say I knew what I wanted to say, but my mouth wouldn't engage, and that can happen. We need to understand in that sense that all different kinds of communication are acceptable. If a person can't speak, that doesn't mean they're not communicating. And they also should always assume competence. That means that you should assume they understand and try not to talk about them around them, say negative things around them, or talk around them as if they don't exist. Like the doctor who said to my husband, was she like this before her surgery? A person could be in there, trapped in their body, not get their mouth in gear, hearing all this and being very upset, and not being able to do anything about it. And just because a person's nonverbal doesn't mean they aren't able to make decisions. You've got to try and look for alternatives, ways to include them in the decision-making process. But a child taking you to the refrigerator because they're hungry doesn't mean they're not communicating. It means they're communicating differently. And you can offer different ways to communicate, but also accept that what they're doing is communication. It doesn't mean that a person lacks emotion or feelings. Some people think of pictures, not in words, as I said. Augmentative communication can be very helpful for people who have difficulty speaking. There are lots of programs out there now. And you ask the person how they prefer to communicate. If you are in a work environment and a person has an APD and they have other issues, they might feel best in board meetings, let's say, or staff meetings, to get an agenda beforehand and then written notes after, so that they make sure they don't lose any material. So you can ask people if they're communicating, if they're able to communicate, which way they best prefer to communicate. Always make sure you talk to somebody in an age-appropriate level. If you're dealing with children that are nonverbal, people tend to talk to them like they're little kids. I had people talk down to me as if I had no intelligence, even though I understood everything. So it's very important to assume competence. And if you see somebody that is having trouble understanding, then you can show them, but don't assume that they don't understand. People with auditory processing issues don't realize how much language there is. So the person who's with that person will have to ensure that they understand you, and provide any kind of technology, opportunities to read the lips, and whatever messaging. I half the time communicate with my son by WhatsApp because it's much easier for him, even though he's sitting right next to me. Whatever works. A little bit about autism. Excuse me. Autism is a different neurotype. It's not a disease. It's not something to be eradicated. Seeing a lot of that talk, particularly now in today's political climate. Autistic individuals perceive and process information differently from neurotypicals. Sensory processing is definitely major factor in autism. They tend to process differently. They definitely have many cases problems with regulation, sensory regulation. This needs to be accommodated for. Understand that stimming, which can be rocking, which can be hand flapping, it can be all kinds of repetitive things. That is something that autistic individuals do to regulate their system. It is not something to be eliminated. It is not bad behavior. If you take it away and you make a person not do that, whatever it is that they need to do to regulate, they're going to be traumatized, and probably something else will come in its place. So stims are not something to be extinguished, which you might hear from a lot of ABA type practitioners. They're not something to be extinguished. It's what you need to do to regulate. And actually, my physical therapist taught me to rock to regulate my system. And I laughed. I said, my kid, some people would say that he shouldn't be rocking because it's inappropriate, but you're teaching me. I said, well, everyone knows it regulates the state of the system. So understand that. And autistic individuals can have a wonderful, happy, fulfilling life. Even if they're not that verbal, doesn't mean that they're going to have a miserable life. They have unique perspectives, talents that can be beneficial in the workplace, different communication, whatever technology, whatever person needs, please enable that. Autistic people can empathize. Actually, many autistic individuals I know, because they have too much empathy, they have to isolate themselves because it just hurts too much, or they feel other people's pain, so they need to have breaks. So understand that what appears to the eye is not necessarily what's going on the inside. A little bit about ADHD. According to CDC, over 6 million children in the U.S. are diagnosed with ADHD. This was a statistic from a few years ago. It's probably more now, just like autism is many more, like even from a year ago. 62% are treated with medication, 47% behavioral therapies. My experience is that in many instances, sensory issues appear to be ADHD, particularly things involving visual and auditory perception. There's a lot of misdiagnosis going on here because nobody is looking at sensory. They look at, they're not paying attention, but they're not looking for the root. So if you see somebody with attention issues, please try and figure it out if they have Earlin, try and figure out if they have or dyslexia, if they have light sensitivity, if they have auditory processing issues or any other sensory things. That only when you have given them everything they need to regulate those things, if the person is having serious problems, then you can, look for the more medical route, I would say. But that's my personal experience and suggestion. Try and find the root of the problem, not just a symptom. Because if you treat the root, then maybe the symptom will go away and you won't need any other intervention, like a colored lens, per se. One thing that's very common with people with ADHD are time management. If they can hyper focus, they tend to get involved or go all over the place. So there's a lot of skills and augmentative software, all kinds of things that can help a person organize themselves. And the more you use them, the better you're off. Remember that brains have plasticity throughout life. Our brains are changing all the time. An area that is damaged can be, a different area can regenerate, or another area can take over. I know people who've had brain injuries that the language center of their brain was actually destroyed, and they speak 2 languages now. Different areas can take over. So it doesn't matter how old you are, and it doesn't matter what state you're in. Your brains can always change and be improved. Work. Cognitive and emotional building blocks take a really long time to become established. But once they're in place, then the sky's the limit. So you don't have to be in a rush to see change. It takes time. Significant change, building neurological connections takes time. And technology and patience and good mediation of the environment and what builds those connections and make those change. A human mediator, somebody who helps process the environment, is the most significant thing to help bring about change and build new connections. A trusting, caring person who helps understand the environment and mediate it. So a quick recap, we're all neurodiverse. That's how it's supposed to be. In light of this, we should try and accept our differences and be patient with ourselves. The environment needs to be adjusted and accommodations made for neurodivergent, neurodistinct individuals, and always assume competence and provide accommodations. And you will see how people prosper and thrive. Remember, neurodivergent individuals work much harder than neurotypicals in class, in a workplace. Understand people need breaks, people need to move, people need accommodations. Is very, very important. They're not being lazy. I do not believe there's such a thing as a lazy child ever. There's a child who's working so much harder and people don't understand. Give them what they need and it'll make it easier for them. Neurodivergent individuals contribute incredible things to life. The world needs all kinds of minds, and neurodivergent individuals are different, but not lesser than neurotypicals. This is how to find me if you would like, and open for questions.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'm just going to mute your mic while I talk. I'm not sure if there's feedback when we're both speaking. But thank you so much for that really comprehensive overview. In terms of questions, I guess audience is still here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. One of the things I wanted to ask earlier from the audience perspective is how might the experience of sudden neurological change differ from growing up neurodivergent? Obviously, one person said there's a period of grieving. That's what they thought that might be happening if that was the case, to grieve your previous version of you, I guess. And so could you speak to that a little bit? And if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be happy to share. Just going to mute myself.
Unmuted me? Well, I think it happens oftentimes too when a child is diagnosed. There's a similar sort of thing that sometimes. Well, that's a little bit different, but coping with a child's diagnosis. Let's say if you have a sort of dream in your head of what a person is their life is going to be like, or your kid's life is going to be like, and then they're diagnosed with something, your expectations need to change, and it might not be what you expected, and sometimes there is a period of grieving. You just realize your reality is very different, but it doesn't need to be something necessarily negative. I can say for myself, I was so focused with the first until I got my early lenses, because before that, I was really pretty much housebound, and I was a very, very, very active person. I was, I had 5 kids, and I was working and running student programs, and I was all over the place. I was like superwoman kind of. And then suddenly I couldn't walk from my couch to the bathroom on my own or take a shower. And for the first 4 years, I was pretty much housebound because my visual disturbances are so difficult that I couldn't really go anywhere until I got my lenses, which regulated things immediately, by the way, and it was like a miracle. So it was really frustrating, but I realized that I have faith. I'm a religious woman. I believe that God does things for a reason, and this is what I think probably was the thing that helped me most get through all of that, is that I do have faith. So I started to try and understand what I could do with it, what the purpose of the whole thing was. It didn't happen to me for no reason. Okay, so if I'm in this situation, what can I do? And I realized that I had the rare ability to be on both sides of the coin. As being a professional parent caretaker, suddenly I'm experiencing it on my own body. So it gave me a different viewpoint. So that's why I decided to write my book, and that's why I do what I'm doing to date. So that realized that I had to have a shift in what my purpose in life was. And I think that's just general with all challenges in life, that we have to adjust and make a shift, but then look what we can do to see how we can do make the best of it and do something good with it if we can. And I think helping others is what really helps us in life to give us a sense of purpose and meaning. And I think everybody can do good. And part of Judaism is also doing good. And if you can do something good for somebody, then it really helps. And so when you don't want to get out of bed at the beginning of the day, because everything hurts and you don't know where you're going, and then it gives you that drive to fight. But I do have to say that I'm quite a number of years out, and there are things I definitely miss. I can't dance. I can't climb trees or hike, which are things I love to do. And sometimes I want to go, like to a musical performance or things that there's lights and noise and crowds, and I can't do those things. So that's difficult. So I miss things, but I try not to let that get me down too much, and I learn to make accommodations. Thank you, Justin. I see that.
So Justin and Kinga have shared their experience of what your story has given, and also Nicole as well. So you've inspired many by sharing your story, so thank you so much. There are other questions. Louise had one around training recommendations, so I'll just mute myself and let you answer that one.
I don't know. First of all, I think the most significant, like I said before, 70% of our sensory processing is visual. And one of the best kept secrets, and I can tell you that school districts, neurologists, and ophthalmologists, they just don't want to hear about it because it's unmeasurable things that medical and educational institutions tend to be interested in things you can measure in numbers, and neurological processing aren't things that you can measure in numbers. So it's not that well known, but the first thing I would suggest to anybody in those fields is to understand and go to the earlyn.com website and consider learning about it, and maybe even becoming a Earlyn specialist. If you're in a didactic assessment, if you do didactic assessments, you can learn about Earlyn. Maybe the person should actually have an Earlyn assessment before a didactic assessment. So check out that route for sure, because that's really significant for anybody. Any kid with a learning issue or attention issue, the first thing I say is check Earlyn, and then go see other things. Other thing is understanding about auditory processing. So those are two different areas of training that you can look into some more. And the other things are significant too, but those I think are the most dominant, particularly in the school environment and the ability to learn in the workplace. Those are the most dominant. And by the way, I saw a comment about Superman. I am not a superwoman. I am just a person doing the best I can. Like I said, I think we all have our mission. And if we all do the best we can, the world will be a much kinder place, I think, if we all try and do good for others. And this world needs a lot of kindness right now. Other questions?
Yeah, I had one around the shift you talked about. What surprised you the most about that shift from sort of going from an advocate to being neurodivergent yourself? What did you think you understood that you actually didn't? What was kind of that revelation for you in that transition? I'm just gonna mute myself.
I spent one of the things, and I think also for a parent or anybody working with or a parent of any kind of different kids or working with people, is to try and become like an anthropologist, a scientist, that observe all the time. So I've been doing that for many, many years. I always tried to observe what was going on, and so many times I would understand that was something going on, like in the visual field, or understand that there was something going on that was sensory processing. I knew that already. It wasn't something I realized it was sensory, not behavioral. What I didn't realize, and I think the biggest revelation was you can't argue with the senses. You cannot turn them off. You cannot say to them, chill, just it's just a little noise, or it's just a flashing light. When my son was about 5, we took him to and he was really nonverbal at the time. Really, he would speak singular words here and there. 5, 6, maybe he was. And we went to an event, and it was in a event hall, and there was a flashing fluorescent light. And we walked into the hall, and it was something he'd never ever done before. He says, "I want to go. Take me home." Now he doesn't do that. We said, all right, just we'll stay here for a few minutes, and then we'll leave. And about 10 minutes later, I need to go. And it was just flashing occasionally, and I didn't realize that it was, it didn't bother me particularly, or the other people that were there. And so we said a few more minutes, and then suddenly it was gone. He took off. He fled. And he was this little kid, and he was not, like I said, nonverbal. You could call him, it wouldn't answer you. And within like 2 minutes, it was panic mode, and we were people running all over the place trying to find him. He'd gotten actually a few blocks away, and he ran. And I couldn't understand why he was that stressed, about flashing light. And what I realized is what it feels like. And that you can't reason. And you feel like you're under attack. So I think that's the biggest revelation that I had. Don't underestimate it, don't discredit it, and realize how incredibly traumatic it can be. Picture yourself in like the middle of a action movie where there's bombs going off around you, and lights flashing, and explosions and stuff, and you just want to run. And that's what it feels like, even though it's logically not that. And if you're a child, per se, with those kind of overwhelm, and you don't have the cognition, which I had, of being on both sides of the coin, I knew that was not reality. I knew there was something off. But if your child had never experienced it differently, it must be so incredibly terrifying, because you think it's real. You think that you're under serious attack. And that was like the big revelation. Don't underestimate how difficult it can be with sensory things, and really try and observe and figure out what that thing is that's disturbing the person and trying to accommodate for.
Thank you, Jackie. And just in terms of what you said, and again, inspiring words, even if disabled, you can't disable love. Justin wanted to kind of share that with you. And then in terms of mixing foods, I think Sandor wanted to just get a bit more context around that.
Mixing food. A lot of children are adults, but you see, they call them picky eaters. They don't like to mix different kinds of consistencies. So let's say you have mashed potatoes with peas, or I don't know, something crunchy with dip, or cereal with milk, or different types of consistencies, different kinds of smells. With food, sometimes they won't have more than one food on a plate. Just don't fight with that. Like I said, the best suggestion I have is what we did was just leave different things around, let them play with it, and eventually they might touch it.
Hopefully that answers your question, Sandor. We have run out of time. We've got a minute left, but just so that when we, if we want to follow up with you, learn more about auditory processing, sensory sensitivity, sensory processing, all of the great things that you've mentioned today, maybe get some training from you. What can they do to connect with you? What's the best way? Could you bring up your slides again, or just let them know where best to connect with you?
Okay, so my slide. Well, I'll just say that my website, and maybe you can share it with your participants after. My website is Jackie's Books. It's JACKIS books.com. And I have contact form on my site. I'm on LinkedIn. You can look for me on LinkedIn. That's the platform. I'm there all the time. It's just my name, Jackie, Jacki. Note, it does not have an E on the end. My parents wanted me to be unique, so they did not put an E on the end of my name. So Jacki, Edry, Edry. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can contact me by email. It's JackiEdryBooks@gmail.com. JACKIEDRY books@gmail.com. Those are the best ways. You can message me on LinkedIn or email or through my website. And I'm very happy to link up with people and answer questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jackie, for your time and energy today. Thank you, audience, for asking your questions. Some people have requested just slides. Completely up to you if you want to share those, but there is no there's no email addresses from our audience using this platform. So it's for those who have shared. If you're happy to share slides, we can forward that on to them if that's helpful or not, because it's your own information as well.
I prefer not to share the slides because they're really the talking points. It doesn't make sense to just share the slides. If you have a recording of this conversation and you want me to share it on my platform, or then you can, I don't know, I'm happy to do that. And I do have a Facebook account too. It's also my name. I'm less active there than other places, but I also have a Facebook account. What else I want to say? And please, anyone is just interested, my book is on Amazon and English Spark. It's called Moving Forward: Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith.
Okay, thanks once again. We're going to be ending now. So thanks everyone for joining, for being inclusive, especially with the sounds piece, and remembering sensory sensitivities come from all walks of life. So even though I hear the suggestions on headphones and earphones, again, I have my own sensitivities there. And this is the first time that I've heard feedback around the sounds being a challenge for some. But thank you. Again, we live in an inclusive world. So if you could also be mindful of what you practice in these spaces too. Okay, so thank you all. Go contact Jackie. We're going to send Jackie's contact details out as well. Thank you so much for your time and energy today, Jackie. It's been really empowering and insightful.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited to have met you, and I'm glad everyone found it informative. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.